So again, as we come to Exodus 13, starting in verse 17, we're going to be looking primarily at verses 17 to the end of the chapter, and then we'll dive into a little bit of the precursor to the parting of the Red Sea, really up to verse 14 of chapter 14 as well. So just as by way of understanding kind of contextually where we are, you can see it here, a map of what's going on, where we have come from. I understand it has the names of certain cities that may or may not be able to be pronounced, and you may not even be able to see all of them, but it is a general route, probably the most popular of the options to understand the route of the Israelites out of Egypt, to kind of just contextualize what it looks like, what track that they're using, how they're going. Again, this is probably the most popular way to conceive of the way that they went, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight as well. So again, this is just to contextualize us where it is on the map that we are. So as we dive in tonight, in starting in verse 17, would somebody be willing to read verses 17 to the end of the chapter? Awesome.
When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they faced war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
On the edge of the desert. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people.
Okay, awesome. So again, I'll point your attention to the wonderful map up here. So what you see is Ramses. That's the city from which they are leaving, right? Let's not get wrapped in legs about that. They go to Succoth. So Pithom Succoth is the little dotted route there. Then over to Etham, that is the city beside the wilderness or beside the desert. Then they will go down and camp in between Migdol, which we know where that is, and Pi Hahiroth, which is the X. We're not quite sure the exact location of Pi Hahiroth. That's the closest estimation. And then you see they're encamping right next to the sea that as it's going down there, or at least the lead into the sea. So as we go into kind of the text itself, we'll kind of unpack that, and we'll reference back to the map as we need. So first, what is something that strikes you or stands out to you in verses 17 to the end of the chapter?
The pillars of fire and the cloud.
Okay, yeah, pillar of fire and the cloud. What about that is striking to you?
It never leaves their side.
Yeah, so there's this kind of enduring presence. Okay. What else? Anything else specifically stand out to you?
Seems crazy to carry Joseph's bones around.
Okay. All right.
Like-
They knew all along he was buried in this.
You
Was
just
that like a
scoop him up.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Wait a minute,
It's a very interesting text, because a lot of people, because of the language that's used here at the end of chapter 13, and the language that's used at the end of Genesis, they will say that this technically ends the Egyptian sojourn, basically. That these two phrases, the bones regarding the bones of Joseph, are actually markers to end the Exodus sojourn. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. So yeah, that's an excellent point to point out.
And they
in
took the
this.
long way.
Yeah, so they took the long way instead of the short way, which is an interesting little tidbit. We'll get into that a little bit. What else might have stood out to you?
They're ready for battle.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in one place it says that the Lord didn't want them to see war, but yet in this other place it says that they were equipped for battle, right? So what's that all about? We got to kind of unpack that a little bit. Yeah. Man, you guys are hitting on all cylinders tonight. This is awesome.
Coffee.
It's the
And we've had our coffee.
okay. Anything else stick out or stand out? I'm not looking for anything specific, just giving everybody time to.
Just Moses having the bones of Joseph and carrying out the oath that was made between Joseph and the Israelites.
Okay. What about that stands out? I guess I'll ask it that way.
It's a good question. I haven't really thought about it too much. I just figured that there's probably some significance in there, and that's taking the time to mention that. I know that the language of oaths is pretty prevalent, especially in like the patriarchal narratives and everything. Of like Abram sending his servant to find a wife for Isaac, he swears an oath. That kind of it's a repeated theme that there's oaths going on and everything like that. And just showing the obedience of Moses and the Israelites at that moment, or in that case, having obedience to the oath with Joseph to do that. And, various bones in the promise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something about that, the fact that they're taking the bones of their ancestors to the land that God has promised to the ancestor of Joseph as well, right? So there's this lineage piece that comes with that. So that's pretty awesome. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive in then. So let's talk first point that you see up there. I think, right, yeah, the way and the reason. All right, so when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines. Anybody know who the Philistines are? Anybody want to say who the Philistines are? Like Goliath, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say the Philistines. The people of Israel.
Yep. So okay. Anything else we know about the
They
Philistines?
stole the ark and
Stole the ark and
a
sent
lot
it
of
back.
trouble.
Yep. Later down the road.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's fine. It's fine. We're asking who they are. How do we contextually understand who these folks are? The Philistines are they're kind of a thorn, really, to the Israelites throughout the duration of their history. They don't just at one point just go away, even though the Lord demanded that they kind of kick their tail.
So they went around.
Yeah, so they went the southern route as opposed to going the northern route. So anybody remember when we were talking about kind of laying the land for Egypt and then the land of the Lord that he would give? Me talking about highways that were created. Anybody remember this?
The Roman road.
Well, not so the Roman roads. The Romans weren't around yet.
Yeah,
But,
no.
no, it's fine. But yeah, so these main trade routes, right, existed. What is suspected is that this northern route by way of the Philistines would have been along one of those major trade routes that would have been consistently monitored, not only by the Philistines, because they were a great power at that time, but also by the Egyptians. They had way stations set up because, people had interest in protecting their stuff that they were trading, right? They were bandits. There were times which, opposing armies and forces would come and just ransack the trade routes just for purposes of shutting down trade. And so that's the way that's suspected that this is referring to, this main trade route way, which goes up and around the Mediterranean Sea.
Does that mean they went the more treacherous way? They didn't take the more routed way. This was the more treacherous or wilderness.
So it depends on what you mean by treacherous, right? So treacherous, as God is defining it, would be taking them away in which they would ultimately end up in a fight.
All right, with the
Right,
Philistines.
right.
Okay.
The southern route, which they did go by, would have been not necessarily less treacherous terrain-wise, but rather less people, less populous to go through. So less opportunities for a skirmish, if you will. I love that word, skirmish. Anyway, sorry, that was side. I'm telling you, man, I had a lot of coffee. Be careful. Why would there be fear of the Israelites turning back, which led to God's decision to not let them go the shortest distance possible? So let's read on a little bit more, right? So the Philistines are thorn in Israelites' side for a long time, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. Why would this be a fear?
Because that's what happened.
Okay.
As soon as they got there and saw there was big people with weapons, they turned around.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Explain it a little bit more. So what time period are we talking about? After the...
Like when they first reached the promised land and they sent the 12 scouts in,
Mm-hmm.
the 10, they report back and they're like, whoa, they're really tall people and they have lots of stuff and resources and everything. And the Israelites were like, oh, God didn't say this was going to be hard. Oh no. And then they all voted to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. So God is in a way preventing that from happening at this early juncture in which they're just leaving. I mean, they're literally like the last person. I mean, think about the massive number of people that we're talking about here. The last person is literally crossing out of the territory of Egypt at the point in which they're getting to this junction point, and they end up going the southern route, or God directs them that way because of fear that they will actually return to slavery. Right? Just think about what God is saying here, that these individuals that he has called and redeemed out, there is a concern that they meet some adversary and they return to slavery as opposed to try to fight them. That's a pretty significant concern. What might that say about the position of Israel, if anything?
They're just weak right now.
I think so. Yeah, it says something about the people of Israel and kind of the position that they're in, right? So this stated reason for directing them this way is that they did not want to go the way of the Philistines, who would then be coming against them. In other words, going this direction would have put them in direct invasion of the Canaanite territory. They would have been interpreted. It would have been interpreted as an invasion at that point, right? So going the way of the trade route would be a way that you would take an army somewhere, and you would then they would be entering Canaan. If I can, oh man, I can't go backwards. They would be entering Canaan at the southeastern section, right next to the Mediterranean Sea. They would be entering Canaan, the land that the Lord had promised them, to essentially interpreted as a takeover, an invasion. Whereas this way sends them around the long way to the other side, that they can come in my opinion, a little bit more discreetly, because you're not entering in by a major trade route, which would have been used to transport troops during time of war. So it makes sense to everyone. Any questions about that? It's okay if we do.
Wouldn't it also say something about God too? More, not necessarily more than the state of Israel at that point, but the fact that, God leads them purposefully another way, only to kind of have the same result later on down the road. Yeah. Wouldn't that say so? Wouldn't it say something about Israel's state, right? Obviously, they're kind of insecure, they're weak, but wouldn't it say something about God too? The fact that He's correcting this. Yeah.
Absolutely, most definitely. Continue. Expound on that a little bit. Like, what does it say about God? Knowing that that's the end state, that's the end goal.
Yeah. Well,
not only the not to cut you off.
Sure,
not only the situation that Joanna's talking about, but literally what we're about to get into in 14:1 through 14.
Yeah.
It leads them to the edge of a sea where their back is up against a sea that they can't cross. Mm-hmm. They're in between Migdol and the sea, in which creates basically a valley which the very strong Egyptian army with chariots is barreling down upon them. So yeah, I'll turn it over. What does it say about God? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think the fact that, you know, in between those two events is the what we really think of the Exodus and the parting of the sea and everything like that. So I think there's something that God wants to show through that, and so He leads them that way. But something about it that even still doesn't stick to where they're at the land, you know, they're at the precipice, but only to be like, oh, we can't go in and take it. I think that's when somebody else says it. I think Caleb and somebody else says that we can go in, but everybody.
Caleb and Joshua,
yeah. I haven't really thought through all that. I just kind of thought about that reading the text. So I haven't really given it much more thought other than, I wonder what that does say.
Yeah, no, we'll pick it back up on it. So remember that. Like, what is this taking them deliberately away from the threat of battle, right? What does that say about what God is trying to do and teach them? And then secondary question, what does it say about what He's trying to teach us through us reading and studying this text? All right, so that's kind of the secondary application question. So leave that in your brain for when we get to chapter 14, verses 1 through 14, because we'll revisit that in just a second. So the other thing is, and I just wrote this down just in trying to kind of make sense of this, that they would have to go think about the position of Israel, right? And this is more back to the question of what does it say about Israel? They would have to go from brick-making slaves to sword-wielding warriors, right? To defeat the Canaanites. The Canaanites were not just like some pushover farmer group, right? These were they had a hardened army who fought battles against some of the more major powers of the world because of where they exist, right? Remember, Philistia, or the place of the Philistines, exists along this trade route from Egypt to what we know as Assyria to over to Babylon. Everything would have been going through them, just like when Israel does eventually go into the promised land, everything goes through Israel. All roads, trade route and otherwise, lead through the land of Israel. There's a significance to that reality. And so what God is deliberately keeping them from is possibly a fight that they would not be in the position nor have the equipment to even fight. But again, does that diminish our view of God? Or should it diminish our view of God? Couldn't God just, win that battle anyway? Because to Jim's point, that's exactly what He does with Jericho. Hey, march around this city 7 times. You won't have to lift a sword. March around this city 7 times, and then we'll make the walls fall.
I think it's a good demonstration of God's grace with us. While yes, He could have walked them straight up to the Philistines and be like, I got this. He realizes that He is guiding a people who lived in hopeless slavery for 400 years. Like, they're not used to hoping, they're not used to trusting, they're not used to believing. And so, like, instead He's like, okay, I'll take you the circuitous route, and I'm gonna part an ocean for you, and I'm gonna make manna fall from heaven, and He's giving them this opportunity to build up that trust and faith. Like, even though they have no excuse at this point not to trust in the Lord, He's having grace with them, being like, I realize you've come from what you thought was a hopeless situation, and so I'm going to give you this time to believe in me.
Yeah, I think that's true, and it's fitting, I think, with the narrative of Exodus, because what was the last point in which they hoped? Right? They hoped when Moses and Aaron united came to them, hey, you're going out of the land. And then what happened when they went and told Pharaoh that? Nope. And guess what? Here's more work, and we're going to make it harder. Right? So they're like, well, dog, like, what's going to happen here? Like, what do we do?
Isn't that kind of like unsettling though? Because if that's the case, if He is trying to build up their trust in Him, I mean, that generation doesn't make it to the promised land though.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, He's having grace with them and giving them the opportunity, but humans are humans. Like, God's being gracious by giving them the opportunity, but they don't take advantage of it.
So I would say 2 things. The fact that there is grace being issued to them because God knows their nature, and exactly what He says to them, they will want to return to slavery. They will want to return to the place that I I provided for them to redeem them out of, right? So there's that ominous reality that they would rather slavery in Egypt than trust in the Lord, is what God is saying. So there is certainly that, but then there is this grace being offered to them, because as we'll get to in 14, 1 through 14, he leads them to a place where they have to. That Moses has to lead them in trusting in him, because there's no way they're getting across this sea without him. And so there are many many graces given throughout the sojourn, or throughout the wandering, or throughout the trek to Egypt. Does that make sense? And I mean, when they get to the precipice of the Jordan, right, and they are ready to cross, and they say, nope, it's just too hard, they're too big, we're not going to do it. And Caleb and Joshua are saying that, guys, we can do this. We have the Lord. And then they ultimately reject him. That is what happens at the precipice of the land. They say, you know what, God, we don't trust you enough. Provided all that they've seen, all that they've done, all that they've seen God do in the way that he's delivered. It kind of puts in context our need for one to do it on our behalf, I would say. And so that's what I would say about that kind of dichotomy, the idea that if they don't trust in him, on one hand, they should just be, chastised for that. And then on the other hand, the continuous grace that's given to them to lead them to a place where they can trust. They can make the decision to trust in him. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The two things. All right. So that's point one, the way and the reason. They go southern route because of the reasons that we've already stated, primarily as the text states, that they don't get into this skirmish with the Philistines. But God, this is verse 18, led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. Okay, let's pause there for a second. We just stated that they weren't ready for war, right? They weren't ready for battle. But yet here it's talking about equipped for battle. Does that strike anybody as strange? It's okay if it doesn't. It struck me as strange.
A lot like us, how we have a plan B to his plan A so often. I don't know if that makes any sense. I just mean like we equip ourselves, like we feel like even though we know God's going to take care of us, and we still like that comfort of being prepared to do our best. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think if we were in that situation, we'd probably be prepared too.
Right.
You know?
What are some of y'all's translations of that phrase at the end of verse 18? And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Israel.
Harnessed out of the land of Egypt.
Harnessed out of the land of Egypt.
Armed for battle.
Armed for battle.
Armed for battle.
Battle formation.
Battle formation. Okay, so I'm gonna. That is a very good translation of what this is actually getting at. The language. Yes, the language of the Hebrew here is actually not talking necessarily about, oh great, I got my sword, I got my shield, I got this, I got that. It's actually just speaking of the orderliness with which Moses led them out of Egypt. So what's actually going on is more akin of description of movements as they go out of the land and go south, right? So it's Moses organizing them in like terms to like a military movement. So we've heard the term 50s and 100s in the New Testament before, right? He set them down 50s and 100s, and later we'll see that he organized them in sizes of hundreds and thousands, right, to put them underneath people. This is essentially what this phrase is getting at. The reason I'm spending so much time on this is because people have questioned this as a slight contradiction of what God says about them in the first, and then what is being presented here in this idea of equipped for battle. Why would they be equipped for battle if there's no threat for battle itself? So it's the language of the Hebrew here is actually speaking more of the movement from and how he was organizing them. Some of them may have been equipped with basic defense tools, right, like a club or something like that, but they're not ready for battle in the sense like we're going to go take us down some Philistines, right? Like,
And wouldn't it be like, I don't know, like, couldn't it be that like they're not ready to fight the Philistines, but the way they're going now, they have a potentially different army, the Egyptians, which I guess if they were faced with battle, they probably would be less tempted to return to Egypt, having to fight Egypt,
Mhm.
than having to meet like the Philistines. I don't know. Like, does that make sense? What I'm trying to say?
rephrase it a little bit.
Like, so he's not leading them to fight against the Philistines, right? Because that'll tempt them to return to Egypt. But wouldn't it be much less tempting if, leaving Egypt, they end up having to face Egypt? Why would they want to return to a land whose people is trying to kill them after getting out, right? You see what I'm saying there?
True.
Yeah.
And you're talking predominantly about Egypt coming after them.
Yeah.
Which we're about to get into.
Yeah.
In 14. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, the language here is specifically referring to the organization of their movement,
Sure. Yeah.
which is why I like the CSB, right? The CSB's battle formations, because it does get at this idea of military movements, organizing them in certain categories. Now, this is different from the way that they move in and about the wilderness.
Mhm.
So we'll cover that at a later time. But I just want to make mention: don't allow this to trip you up. They're not going like ready to fight, the people of Succoth or the people of. That's not what they're seeking to do. They're literally just yeah.
The worst place around.
That's right. They're literally just talking about the way Moses chooses to organize their movements away from Egypt. So that battle formations is a fantastic translation of the end of that verse. All right, now we get into the ancestor part, right? So Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. So let's pause there for a second. The bones of this ancestor. So what I want us to do is turn back to Genesis chapter 50, verse 25. This is a direct fulfillment of what Joseph asks for his brothers to do in this passage in Genesis. And I want us to see this. Genesis 50, starting in verse 25. Let's just read from 22 to the end, just kind of get running start here. Would somebody read Genesis 50, verses 22 through 26 for us?
Sure. Joseph and his father's family remained in Egypt. Joseph lived 110 years. He saw Ephraim's sons to the third generation. The sons of Manasseh's son Machir were recognized by Joseph. Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will certainly come to your aid and bring you up from this land to the land that he swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Joseph made the sons of Israel take an oath. When God comes to your aid, you are to carry my bones up from here. Joseph died at the age of 110. They embalmed him and placed him in a coffin in Egypt.
Okay, so he repeats the very oath back over here in Exodus, right? Keep that in mind, right? So God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. So again, it's the exact same verbiage that's being used because it's a quotation of the oath that's being made. What significance would it have for Joseph to ask this of his brothers, of his people?
The significance of it?
Mm-hmm. Why would Joseph want his bones to be brought from Egypt?
Want him to be buried in the promised land.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Because Joseph is a son of the promise as well, right? The lineage of Abraham. He would have known this, right? He would have been steeped in this. despite his time in Egypt and his rise to power and ranking of power in Egypt, whatever we want to say about that, he still saw himself as a son of Jacob. He was still a son of Jacob, who was a son of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham. This promise that was made for the promised land to be the eventual reality for God's people is something that he would not want his brothers, his people, to forget. Not only for himself through his bringing his bones there. There's nothing special about his bones being brought there. It's the fact that he is in many respects linking the now generation of Israel back to the promise that was made through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob by way of this ancestor Joseph. Does that make sense?
It's like a reminder that you're not from this place, right?
Yeah. There's a certain, yeah, absolutely.
Because they've been there for so many years that it's
Mhm.
like, you know, that's had to be hard, a hard transition for them.
Right.
So,
And the other reality is, who would have naturally had to forsake Joseph's memory to enslave the Israelites?
Say that again.
Who would have naturally slighted the memory of Joseph by enslaving his people?
Pharaoh? Is that what
Yeah, Pharaoh,
okay.
the Egyptians,
Yeah.
right? The Egyptians would basically be slapping, proverbially, right? Slapping Joseph's memory in the face. We know that you're the only reason that we live today. Our nation made it, but we're going to enslave your people that came from you. Like, that's a pretty audacious thing. Right? It's like we would not exist as a people if it were not for you. However, we're going to now build our wealth and our abilities on the backs of your descendants. And so it shows really all throughout the thing that Egypt was never Joseph's home. That makes sense? And that's an important aspect. That is, I think, one of the significant parts of his bones being brought up to go to the land of Egypt, because it is saying like where God's presence will remain, namely with Israel in the land, is where true Israel will be. And also, as I mentioned earlier, this is a marker of the end of the Egyptian sojourn, of the Egyptian enslavement. With this phrase, this promise, this oath, you see the bookends on the story of Egypt. Does that make sense? Predominantly, if you believe that the author of Genesis is mainly the author of Exodus, right? So that's kind of that's something that's up for debate for some. But yeah, so this reality that this is not, Egypt was not the home or the intended home of Israel. And by bringing Joseph's bones up, that is another way that they are definitively saying that. I read this quote as I was preparing. Canaan represents one's future, where one is headed. Joseph's bones represent one's past, where one has come from. Here, the future and the past are wedded without either consuming the other. That is a healthy way to view what is transpiring here through the promise of Joseph, or the oath that he made them take, being fulfilled. Does that make sense? So that it's wedding the promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to this new generation of redeemed Israelites out of Egypt. And that's a very powerful image for us to carry through the next section of Exodus. Because what God will do on the other side of the Red Sea is establish his law by giving them his character that they are to follow. You will be my people, and you will take this into the land and live in such a way that will call people to live and emulate me. Like that there's a powerful nature to that. that is being spoken of here, even with this one phrase of bringing up the bones of Joseph, which seems weird to us, right? It's like, man, why was it put the world? But I just wanted to make that point because it's very significant as we wed what has come from in the past to what will come in the Moses in the law code of Moses. And also covenantally, right? Jim made the point last week of the covenants. So you have the Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant that are being wedded together as well. There's a pretty strong significance to that as you move forward throughout the story of Israel. Does that make sense? Any questions? Any pushback? Any thoughts that I didn't think of? Because I'm not perfect. Okay, let's bring it home to the end of the chapter, right? So with our last couple verses. And they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. These two verses seem, as some would say, very allegorically, meaning things represent other things. That the pillar of cloud is like one representation of God, and the pillar of fire is another representation of God. Again, the only reason I mention this is because it is actually a fairly prominent thing that people say. I don't think that is true, right? I think that what is going on here is that God is providing his enduring presence no matter the time of day, no matter the situation they find themselves. His presence is enduring with them. And that's the message that needs to be communicated from the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. It's not somehow to be construed as, the Spirit of God works during the day and the wrath of God comes at night or something crazy, right? That's not what this text is about. This text is about ensuring that the Israelites know that God is with them and leading them even during this time where they feel like their entire existence has been upheld. Does that make sense? Any questions regarding that? And it may even be, I think I'll put it, no, that's not the picture that I had in mind. That's the wonderful Charlton Heston classic 10 Commandments one. But it may even be such that, and all this is speculation, so this is Adam's musings of the mind. It may even be something to the effect that there is smoke that is surrounding by day. It is very difficult to see the fire because of the light that is surrounding them. And however, by night, there's still the smoke. It's not like the smoke disappears. It's just that you can see the illumination of the fire more clearly. You can see this actually even in natural phenomena such as volcanoes, right? During the day, it doesn't look like the volcano is glowing at all. You can just see the smoke rising up from the top. But however, when it gets dark, you actually see the glowing and emanating rocks even from the base of the volcano. Anybody ever seen that? Anyway, it's an interesting image. So anyway, so that's all I'm saying. Again, this is just Adam's musing of the mind. You guys have seen volcanoes. You've seen that.
Yeah, we've seen the result of volcanoes.
Okay, gotcha.
Guam
Okay,
is a result of a volcano.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyways, all that to say, no, it's fine. All that to say, it seems as though the fire is burning inside the cloud all the time. It's just at night it is more visible than not. Why spend so much time on that, Adam? Because people make up tons and tons of things about what these things mean and apply superficial meanings to the fact that the smoke was by day and the fire was by night. All that is being communicated, again, I will say it again, is that God's enduring presence is leading them and guiding them during a time in which he has just redeemed them from Egypt, saying, I'm not going to redeem you to nothing. I will continue to be present with you. Makes sense. Push back? Anything?
I was just gonna plug our video. If you haven't seen Johnny Crash,
Oh, yeah, the children's video.
the children's video.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah, so we did a rendition of the Ring of Fire, but made it the Pillar of Fire, and told the story of the
That's pretty emotional.
Israelites leaving.
If
Anyway,
you haven't seen it, just go
it's
check it out.
it's pretty good. It's pretty good. This quote kind of captures, I guess, what I'm trying to say, maybe even more, definitely more eloquently than I'm saying it, but it's just nice. Anyway, Israel need not stumble through the foreboding wilderness by itself, trusting in its own wits or sense of direction. Rather, the Israelites need simply to keep their eyes on the cloud and the fire, and they will get to where God wishes to take them. Again, much more eloquent, much more wonderful of a way to say what I was trying to say. And that is that God's enduring presence continues for his people. It doesn't just somehow wither away after a great act of redemption. It's still there. And just if I can switch to kind of application here, just because God has saved you, that's not the end of your salvation story. It's not the end of you. It's not the end of the track, right? It's not somehow we get to salvation and we're like, well, that's great. I'm glad I rode that train. It's a continual life that has been given to you. You're literally being born again. You are being moved from death to life. If anything, you are actually beginning to live after salvation. And we should shy away from this idea of after our redemption, it's just life as normal. Rather, we should see that as actual life. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Don't want to float into allegory too much there, but that's just the realities of what our salvation in Christ gains for us, is that we get to actually live as though all these things are true, because they are. Does that help make sense of anything? Any questions, any thoughts? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to read 1 through 14, and we're only going to tackle verses 1 through 4. And then we'll leave 5 through 14 left for the rest. So would anybody like to read verses 1 through 14 of chapter 14? Okay, awesome.
1 through what?
1 through 14 of chapter 14.
And the Lord said to Moses, tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Rock,
Yep.
between Migdol and the sea in front of Baal Zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea. For the Pharaoh will say of the people of Israel, they are wandering in the land of the wilderness. In the land, the wilderness has shut them in, and will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. And I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of the Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people. And they said, what is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made ready his chariot, took his army with him, and took 600 chosen chariots, and all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel, while the people of Israel were going out triumphantly. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them and encamped at the sea by Pi-Hahiroth, in front of Baal-Zephon. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. They feared greatly, and the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent.
Okay, awesome. So so ends on a good note. We're gonna tackle 1 through 4, and what I want us to do over the next week is kind of digest and think through 5 through 14, and come back with questions, thoughts as to how it relates to us. But as we conclude tonight, I wanted to kind of set the stage with 1 through 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Pi-hathron, between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal-Zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea, for Pharaoh will say of the people of Israel, they are wandering in the land, and the wilderness has shut them in, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." And they did so. So the reason I wanted to kind of highlight that before we're done for tonight is because of the assurance that God's presence was seen and brought comfort and direction to the people of God in the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. And now there's a promise from God that his glory will be shown and will reign supreme over this leader that they once served. And that's this powerful image to kind of end out tonight, I think. This idea that God is promising the end of Pharaoh. He's promising that Pharaoh will recognize and know God's glory because of his actions. And so the reason I wanted to kind of end with that tonight is because it's a strong message, I think, to us, in that as we continue through this this life of salvation that we've been given and gifted by Christ, and we know that he has not left us without himself. We know that he continues to provide for us. He will also continue to show and demonstrate his glory over all facets of not only our lives, but as we look into the future at his second coming. His glory reigns supreme. And if we ever lose sight of that, we may be tempted to get downhearted or disheartened, to let anxiety rule our lives, to allow the situations that we are placed in and the social realities around us rule and guide our fears. And we don't have to, because we know that God is not only present with us, but we know his glory will ultimately be had over all of the earth. So any questions, any things to add before we kind of close? And like I said, over this next week, think through the ramifications of what is being said in verses 5 through 14, because it's pretty thick. And so anyway, I'm not going to get into it today because it's beautiful, but it's thick. There's some significant things that are going on there, particularly when you put them in light of why God didn't lead them in the northern path. So again, we'll chew on that over the week and come back together and kind of talk through it. But anything to add for what we've covered, things that I missed, points of interest to what we studied tonight? How does this message of enduring presence of the Lord affect you? What will it, as you walk out these doors, and this is more of a pressing question, as you walk out these doors, what will it equip you with?
God is with us.
Mm.
His presence is with us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I keep thinking about that thing that people say that's not true, that God will not give you more than you can handle.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that. But he does. He gave them plenty more than they could handle, but so that they could trust in him.
Mm.
And it was still difficult. He spared them from some things, but we forget God's timing is perfect. God's timing is right. And so I think it's a good reminder of God's sovereignty in our lives, and that there's going to be difficulty, and sometimes he's going to lead us right to it, and other times around other difficulties, but difficulties will always be there, but we always have him with us. And I think that's what makes the difference, no matter what.
Mm. Good reminder. Anything else?
I think I'm going to be the pillar and so am I.
And what?
Set it on fire.
A pillar and set it on fire?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Please video it so that we all can take part in what you're going to do. Yeah, that would be awesome. Okay, awesome. Well, let me close this in a word of prayer, and we'll be done from there. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for just your grace, your presence amongst us even tonight as we have studied your word. Lord, I pray that your Spirit would continue to guide and direct our minds as this message that is communicated to your people through this text continues past this doorway. Lord, may it affect and change the way that we live our lives. May we not live in anxiety, fear, and disheartened, but rather live in a sense of a hope in the salvation that you've given us, the fact that you have enlivened us where we didn't deserve it. You have redeemed us from death, and that you continue to work in and through us to show your glory. Lord, may we hope in that glory, not only that has come to us in Christ, but that will eventually be so in your second coming. Lord, help us. Help us to image you well. Help us to present the truth of the gospel to those that don't know you. And Lord, would you use us mightily for those that do not know you to come and understand and sit at the feet of the Savior, trusting in him for all, that they may live lives that are glorifying to him as well. Lord, I thank you for this group. I thank you for this time that we're able to dedicate to study of you. And I pray, Lord, that your character would just continue to shine through us as a church, as individuals, as we study your word, and as we continue to live it out before others who don't know you. We pray all this in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. Thank you guys so much for being with us, and look forward to seeing you on Sunday.